Welcome back to my channel. I am so excited about this video. My name is Wendy Renee and welcome to my show. Brianna, thank you so much for being on my channel. For those of you who are not familiar with Brianna, she has this amazing community that she has made on TikTok. Please go follow her. She has this natural gift of telling her story and making others feel comfortable telling theirs. And so the reason why I brought you on my channel, Brianna, is because a lot of our viewers, they are victims and survivors of narcissistic abuse, whether it's through a parent, through religion.
Right.
Bottom line is the tactics are all the same. Really happy to have you here. So if you could speak on a little bit of your story and
Sure.
how you recognized it and what things look like for you now.
Sure. My mom lived with my grandmother until she was 39 years old. So my grandmother essentially raised me. My mom was abusive that entire time. My grandma tried her best to protect me, but unfortunately she passed when I was 13. And so I became my mom's sole property, so to speak, at that time. And that's where the true abuse came out, because there was no longer that protection. My mom was a very neglectful mother, of my basic needs, food, clothing, and stuff. I could have those things so long as on her terms, and she decided when. Otherwise, I always knew not to ask. And then my stepdad became her enabler, and eventually he also became an abuser himself. When I was 18, I tried to move out several times, but it was threatened by having certain things taken away from me. My car was in their name, even though they didn't pay for it. So of course that was like a manipulation tool. And I worked 3 jobs and put myself through college. And I had a 3.9 GPA, and they still were able to keep this over my head, right? I'm taking care of everything and you're still keeping me here. So eventually I took out a student loan just to move out, because I knew if they decided to follow through with that threat of keeping my car, I'd need to buy myself another one, or at least afford rent, one or the other. So that's how I got out. I went on to date, obviously, toxic people, eventually a narcissist. And then I met my husband, who had a mother-in-law who was a malignant narcissist. I found out about this because I was diagnosed in 2014 with obsessive compulsive disorder, very much brought on by all my trauma. The reason why I definitely know this is as soon as I got to a place where I felt safe, all of my OCD just erupted. I went from not having it at all to all of a sudden it just controlling every aspect of my life. So it was like, once I got safe, all my defenses sort of fell away, because you're like, you're good now. And all the trauma came bubbling to the surface. Thankfully, through a really amazing psychiatrist, she asked what my triggers were, and we were talking about situations and people. I brought up my mother-in-law because she was a big point of tension in my life and my relationship with my husband. And she asked if I'd ever heard the term malignant narcissist. So from there, she said, why don't you go home and do some research? So I did. And then I kept doing more research, and all of a sudden I was enlightened on why my whole life didn't make sense for the longest time.
Had you heard of it up until that point?
No.
Yeah, so this is all
I'd
new.
heard the term narcissism, and I always just thought, oh, that's just someone who's selfish,
Right. Or someone who really likes themselves, which is
Yes.
actually true, but deep down,
Yeah.
narcissists are actually hurting deeply.
Yes, exactly. So I did not have an intricate understanding of what that actually meant. So doing the research started to really answer a lot of questions for me that I couldn't answer before. Why does my mom not love me the way that other moms do? Why does my mom treat me this way? Why does my mother-in-law feel the need to control our relationship? All these questions that I've always wondered and could never fix, no matter what I did to try and fix the relationship or work on the relationship, because obviously they weren't going to,
Right.
were finally answered. It started to make sense.
Wow.
Next step is, well, now that you've realized it, what do you do?
Yes. What do you do with that information? It wasn't until I was much older, out of the house, my late 30s, already a mom, already married, that I realized it.
Right.
But for many of our viewers who were perhaps young, living at home, and maybe I also want to segue into getting into familiar relationships after. So I'm interested in your experience with that. So yeah, now what? So once you had that information, what did getting to work look like for you?
Oh, it was a lot of things. So thankfully I was already in therapy and like I had to see a therapist and a psychiatrist and do mindfulness classes, as well as cognitive behavioral therapy, because my OCD had taken over my whole life.
So when it comes to your OCD diagnosis, a lot of times we're diagnosed with things and it really is unresolved trauma. For example, I've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia by the top rheumatologist in the country.
Right.
Come to find out, I absolutely do have fibromyalgia,
Right.
but fibro also, I noticed a trend that I would have flare-ups when I was triggered or when I was especially emotionally vulnerable. And then once I addressed the trauma, magically the flares started going away. So I'm curious about your opinion on your OCD.
Yes, very similar experience. I definitely have obsessive compulsive disorder. The more that I've dealt with the trauma, the less prevalent the OCD is in my life. And I can definitely find a correlation between a lot of the things that I do have issues with and the abuse from my previous abusers. Wow. I can see the direct correlation, particularly around food, because food was a form of manipulation and punishment in so many ways. So I have a lot of OCD around food, and it takes over my life in a lot of ways. So that's one I'm still working on. The rest have sort of fallen away slowly, but that one's a big one.
That's a big one. And for me, I think I was never formally diagnosed with OCD, but I see the pattern. Most of the times when people are leaving high control religion or a high control relationship, a lot of the OCD for me is OCD and rumination of thought. I
was about to say, I have a lot of intrusive and ruminating thoughts.
Yeah. And a lot of people think that OCD is just cleaning your hands and being clean. That's a symptom of OCD, certainly, and that people can have it differently. But for me, I never related OCD to thoughts. So when it comes to an overbearing narcissistic mother, for me, it was never feeling good enough, always feeling like I needed to pay for something. I was never grateful enough. There was always something wrong with me. And so that's what the rumination started in my head was, I'm not good enough. It's this loop that doesn't seem to stop looping of thought.
Exactly. Yes. Yes, I definitely can relate to that. I've had that both with my thoughts about my abuse and then just thoughts that are not like rational thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, intrusive thoughts. I'm glad there are people who are talking more publicly about them.
Yeah.
So for you, how long ago was your realization and therapy, and where are you now? What does your life look like now with regard to narcissism?
So I guess I'll start at when I decided to go no contact and how I've gotten to this point. So once I knew what narcissism was, I knew that I couldn't have a relationship with them unless they were willing to change. And most of us already know that's not a possibility, or it's very unlikely possibility. So I just approached my mom and said, hey, I need you to go get help. And if you don't, then I am going to have to eventually cut ties with you because I can no longer take the abusive behavior. Of course, she projected, deflected, came up with a million excuses. I even offered to pay, find her a therapist. Like I was willing to go the distance. And unfortunately, she rejected that. In my head, I didn't tell her this. I had decided I'll give her a year. And literally only 2 weeks after that conversation with her on the phone, I went, what am I waiting for? I already know the answer because she's proven it by years of patterns in her behavior. That was part of the healing journey, was stop looking at her as an independent individual encounter and start looking at her as a whole picture and as a pattern, because she had already proven to me 1,000 times before that she was not willing to get help. So why this one time would be different, I don't know. But once I realized she has already proven this to me, that answered so many of my, I guess it sort of nurtured that part of me that was guilty, that felt guilt, right? Because that's so much of what our relationships with our abusers are founded on.
Were there times in your life you can remember, because I'm not sure if every narcissistic parent is like this, but this is a trait where There was always some kind of a medical issue. There was always something wrong. Some narcissists are always going to the doctor to garner sympathy from their family. They would go to get help for those things.
Yes.
But not for the narcissism itself. Was that your experience?
Yes. So I have two comments on that. My mom was a very somatic narcissist. So she was very focused on the external, how she looked, how she appeared to others. And so with that came a lot of hypochondriac behavior. So she was constantly sick, constantly ill. She was a hoarder. So when I would go through her house occasionally to try and help, there was a time where there was like 12 crutches and like 5 walking boots and like tons of wrist guards. And I'm just like, no normal human being has these kinds of collections.
Wow.
So that for me was a little eye-opening. But so yeah, she definitely loved being sick and getting injured because she did like the attention that it brought her. But additionally, my mom had been institutionalized a few times for attempted self-harm. And I say attempted because I really don't believe that it was a genuine depression. It was more of desperation to get her way. And so maybe it was like a desperation of you not leaving her, like, you know, the threat of abandonment.
Of course.
And so, you know, she would go to get help, whether she wanted to or not. And then they would release her and she would be okay for a short amount of time, but would stop treatment, you know, as soon as people started to believe that she was getting better, and then immediately would revert back. So I think, you know, she liked the attention of getting better, but immediately realized it took too much work and effort.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think going back to the hypochondriac behavior was a lot easier for her. She's like, oh, this is a lot less work.
It's almost like empowering them and making them look, wow, look at you. You're walking, you're feeling better. You're great. The mind has such wonderful control over the body. It's almost like what would be empowerment to someone who doesn't have this toxic trait.
Right.
Makes them feel terrible. Like empowering them has the reverse effect. Whereas if you were to, I know, I don't know about you, but for me personally, do not give me sympathy. I've had multiple surgeries and I'm just like, okay, we're going to do the work. We're going to bounce back. We're going to get back to our normal life and move on. There have been times I've been hospitalized and I don't tell a soul.
Right.
One of the reasons why is because of that upbringing.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm very much the same. I do not like to get attention for my pain. I want to work on myself and I just want to be better. And if people happen to notice, great, but it's not something that I need to parade around, you know?
Exactly. And then when you are a mom and you do need help, here's where the problem is. You don't ask for help because you look at asking for help and, hey, I'm in the hospital. I really am feeling sad. I would like a visit.
Yes.
You relate that to, I don't want to be like my mother, so I don't want anyone.
Yeah, it's so reminiscent of your abuser that you're like, no, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So now you're a mom and a wife. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about how that worked and your relationship with your husband?
So I was with an abusive ex. And my husband that I am now married to was my friend while I was dating this other person. And he was just such a good friend that over time I went, man, this friend of mine is nicer to me than my own boyfriend. And there was no overlap or anything, no cheating like that. That's just something I would never do. But in that moment, just realizing, wow, there's somebody else out there that could treat me better. It was no intention to be with my now husband, but it was just the realization, and that gave me the strength to finally walk away. Wow. And then from there we ended up together. That was not part of the plan, it just happened. And you know, he ended up being an abuse victim himself, so we could bond over that while also realizing we had so much to work on as well. So it's been a journey because we both are people who have had a lot of trauma. I recognized that he had trauma before he did. So that was also another part of the relationship that was a little challenging. But I think we both equally wanted to be together so much so that he and I both have always been willing to work through our trauma. I think that was my motivation, was I finally feel loved and I want to finally feel worthy of love. That was a big part of healing.
So now you have children.
Yeah.
And here's where the hardest part is,
Yeah.
from my perspective, having 2 kids and being the adult daughter of a narcissist, I
Right.
didn't know how to parent my children.
Right.
All I knew was that I knew what felt wrong in my childhood. I knew what I didn't want to do. I knew what I
Yes.
didn't want to repeat, but I didn't have the tools.
Right.
So how did you experience that? And what did parenting look like for you after all of this whole lifetime of narcissism?
Well, the first thing we did while I was pregnant was we both did therapy and tons of journaling, lots of podcasts, listening to motivational speakers, like anything to sort of jumpstart into being better people. Was like, okay, we'll be a foot up on this if we just work on being better people. So that was good. But then shortly after our first son was born, it was like a rude awakening where we went, oh gosh, he's going to start realizing we have no idea what the hell we're doing. And there are going to be repercussions for that. So, we did the best we could until it came to a head where we realized we need to do more. And that's when we started looking into parenting courses, because we realized a parenting course will help us navigate and sort of sift through what does healthy parenting actually look like, because neither of us have a clue.
Right.
So that was our next step. And I think it was extremely beneficial.
Mm-hmm. And how old are your kids now?
One is our oldest, he's almost 5, and the other one turned 2 in April.
Oh, so they're still little. So you've been able to reverse the cycle. And
I hope so.
Narcissism seems to be a buzzword. It's talked about a lot on TikTok. And
right.
I also know that people wonder if they are narcissists. If you wonder if you're a narcissist, you're not a narcissist. So can you speak on that? Did that ever, I know it occurred to me, because people would always say to me, you're just like your mother. You look just like her. You act just like her. I'm like, well, if it quacks like a duck, then, so what's your opinion on that? And what can you give advice to someone who is wondering if they're just like their parent? Because generational trauma is a very real thing.
It's a very real thing. And to your point, so I used to wonder the same thing. I even wondered if my own husband was a narcissist and I just didn't know it, right?
Yes.
Because he did have tendencies that resembled his own mother's behavior. Mm-hmm. Why? Because we were raised by narcissists. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's uncommon for children or even spouses that have spent a long time with a partner that's abusive, for us to pick up these tendencies and tactics to survive. Right. That's when you learn dysfunctional communication, then you take it with you into the next stages of your life. So I think that's why a lot of abuse victims will go, am I abusive? Because you do have toxic tendencies that you've picked up from your abuser. But the difference is you're self-reflective, right? So and a lot of us, being the empathetic people that we are, we don't want to hurt people. So we recognize, oh God, I did this. Am I the narcissist? And it's because we don't want to hurt others. That is the biggest telltale sign that you are not a narcissist, is the fact that you're self-reflective and care that you are one for the potential of hurting other people. So all of the toxic behaviors that we pick up on are all things that could be changed. I think we believe so much because our parents have ingrained in us that we will never amount to anything, that we sort of think we're stuck with these qualities that we picked up from them. And that's so far from the truth.
I love that point. And I especially love the fact that all of us as human beings, we have narcissistic tendencies. In fact, some of them are healthy. Some of them protect us.
Right.
And narcissism, let's talk about what narcissism is not. And granted, neither of us are therapists. So if you are watching this and you are a narcissistic survivor, or if you are currently dealing with abuse, get into help right away. But this is just our anecdotal personal experience and all the work that we've done in working with therapists. So I really just wanted to say that we've all done things in our life where maybe we've told a little white lie. Maybe we were a little manipulative to get our way. And I think a lot of times we confuse being human with, am I a narcissist?
Right.
And it is all about motive. Empaths
it is.
Seek to understand. Mm-hmm. Narcissists seek to control.
Yes.
If my daughter came to me and said, Mom, you really hurt me when you said that, I'd be like, oh my goodness, I hurt my daughter's feelings.
You just got it. Yes, that's my exact reaction as well.
Yesterday, it's funny. Yesterday we were out with my husband for Father's Day, and we were having this conversation. My daughter's at this phase of her life where she's very social and I'm the taxi driver. And sometimes she throws stuff at me so often that sometimes I admit maybe I say yes and I'm not really paying much attention. So
Sure.
she called me out on it. We get to the restaurant and she's like, listen, and the way she said it was adorable. Mom, listen, I know you said you don't want to put 7 people in our car, but the other day I asked you and you said we could. And then I told all of my friends that we could. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Right.
If I said yes to that, mommy probably wasn't paying attention, and I'm going to own that. I'm really sorry. So let's come up with a plan.
Right.
And I said, I don't want you to ever feel like you can't call me out on something, because I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to. I never had that freedom in my life growing up ever.
Right.
And I want that for my kids.
Yeah, that's something that my husband and I talk about a lot. We always talk about, we have a democracy in our home where everybody's feelings matter and, come into account. And, even though they're all, they're little, and especially my oldest, he's only 4, it's like his feelings are still valid. We might think they're silly because we're adults and we have the ability to cope in ways that he doesn't. But he doesn't need to know that we find them silly, because they are valid to his tiny little self. That's the biggest problem he has. Of course he's devastated. Of course he's upset, and it's his right.
Mm-hmm. And 4-year-olds have big feelings.
They do. Big. Yeah. And they don't have the same coping skills that we do. And they also don't have control the way that we do. Mm-hmm. So, we very much harness, like, however he's feeling, even if to us it seems small, it's a big deal.
Right. And particularly most of the viewers on my channel currently are familiar with abuse and high control religion. And one of the main reasons I wanted to introduce you to them was because sometimes we see a lot of narcissism hidden in religion. So you don't really notice the trends of dysfunction until you leave the religion. That was it for me. That was it for me.
Absolutely.
And I often wonder, would I have picked up on it earlier if we didn't have the religion as the other component of control in our lives? Right. I think there's much to be said about how religion can easily cause dysfunction when there's control all around. So it just adds another layer.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely. I didn't have like a moral code around me. My experience with my mom was very overt and obvious to me. Obviously it comes in like levels or progression. You understand this is abnormal, but then you internalize it's probably me. Mm-hmm. And then as you get a little older and you get more exposure to the world, you start to realize, okay, this is still abnormal. Mm-hmm. But maybe it's me, but maybe it's not me. And so you kind of keep moving your way progressively outside of that bubble that, you get raised in and that dysfunction. So I always knew, but I just didn't know how bad until I got the distance. And I think
Yes. So I wanted to also talk about no contact.
Sure.
What does no contact look like? And the difference, you did a video that I was really grateful for. And if you wouldn't mind reiterating it, the difference between boundaries, no contact, and how to know when no contact is.
So for me in my research, what I kind of concluded about boundaries is boundaries are about protecting yourself, right, from further harm. And ultimatums tend to be more about controlling the other person and controlling the outcome. So a lot of times when abusers will see any sort of boundary, any sort of, hey, can you please stop, as an ultimatum, even if it is an actual boundary. They see it as a threat. And so it's internalized as an ultimatum. With boundaries, I think they are very useful and very helpful depending on the situation, but depending on the proximity and the relationship to your abuser, a lot of them will completely disregard the boundary. And for me, I mean, that's not everyone, but for me, my mom was never going to respect a boundary. She was the kind of person that was going to show up on my front door. And, and technically, yes, I have the decision right to not answer the door, but I also went, is that the kind of life that I want to live? Where I'm constantly walking on eggshells, where I'm constantly waiting for, oh gosh, what's she going to do this week? Those kinds of thoughts and feelings. So for me, it was clear after quite some time of trying to instill boundaries in that relationship and with my mother-in-law that I realized no contact was probably the best option. I also want to say with boundaries that one of the things that I had said before my mom and I went completely no contact was I said, I need you to go to therapy or our relationship will eventually come to an end. And some people had pushed back and said that's an ultimatum. And so what I want to make clear, because a lot of people do feel like this is an ultimatum and it wouldn't be fair to their parents or wouldn't be fair to their spouse, but here's the difference. I had let go of the fact that, hey, if you don't get help, I'm okay with that. But on my end, I have to do what's best for me. And that is to remove myself. It wasn't about me controlling her. It wasn't about me telling her what she had to do or any of those things. It was just, because you don't recognize you're abusing me, you do need to get help. Right. And unless you do that, I can't participate in this anymore.
Wow,
but
so
I was also,
like you gave a warning before.
I did.
Wow.
So I did give a warning. I didn't give her a time frame. I knew internally, like I had said, that
Right.
it was going to be about a year, right? But like after a couple weeks of talking to other people and just thinking about it, I went, what am I waiting for? Because I know what the answer is, and I know what ultimately is going to happen.
And I'm sure the empath in you wanted to be wrong. I
know. Oh, of course.
I know I did. Like, please let me be wrong about this, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was calling her was sort of like that ultimate last test where I went, prove to me that you're not what I think you are. And then she did exactly what I didn't want, but was okay with, right? Like I had come to terms with, this is the likely outcome and I need to accept that.
Right.
So of course I grieved and I was upset. But I also knew that that was the best course of action. So for me, at least in terms of no contact, to answer your question, I think some people think no contact means you just don't contact them back. For me, no contact means absolute 100% cut off, which I know can seem really extreme, but when something is toxic, you don't let it slowly ooze back into your life, right? You wouldn't be like, oh, I want to have, well, this soup isn't entirely,
right,
filled with poison, so I'll only have a few bites of it. No, you wouldn't do that. So for me, it was like, I went no contact. And then as I did that, I realized the areas that I left unguarded or unprotected. And then those I had to continue to block off as well. So I changed my phone number because I didn't want that to happen. Then, of course, my parents tried texting my husband. And so I told my husband, if they text you, don't respond, 1, and 2, don't tell me because I don't want to hear about it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, and if you want, you're welcome to block them so that you don't even have to know or worry about it as well.
Right.
But, I was in contact with some family members and it became very clear which ones I could no longer have a relationship with because they wanted to be the flying monkey and they wanted to communicate for my narcissist and me, or the narcissist and me. And I had stated very clearly, I'd love to have a relationship with you. It's okay that you have a relationship with them, but I don't want you talking about me to them. And I don't want you to tell me things they say about me. So we could talk about anything else. And unfortunately, that was a boundary they couldn't keep. And so it made me realize I couldn't tell them anything securely without the possibility of it getting back to my abuser.
Wow.
So, it is a ripple effect, but it's important. And I think the last part I'll say about no contact is when you allow yourself to still have the possibility of them reaching out, whether it's through social media, other people, or through phone, email, whatever it might be, you're giving them the opportunity to hoover you back in. You're giving them an opportunity to jab you where it hurts, knowing that they'll get a reaction out of you eventually. And that's why no contact really does mean zero contact, and not just on your part, but on their part. You have to block every sort of opportunity they can get to reach you in order to truly do it effective.
And I appreciate the fact that you said it's extreme, and it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just because it's extreme doesn't mean it's not necessary.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Brianna, I also want to talk to the mother who's watching this, because the question that you and I get asked often is, what do you do when the narcissist happens to be the grandparent of your children? If I were to speak, because I was kept from my grandparents, aunts, uncles, because my mother told me all these horrible stories about them, that
right,
your family doesn't want to be around us because we're Jehovah's Witnesses. And I found out 30 years later, I could have actually had a relationship with them even while I was in the religion, because my grandmother didn't care. So I never want to repeat the patterns of putting bad ideas in my kids' heads. So how do we not repeat those patterns? For me, I can easily say, I don't speak badly about any family member, even the narcissist, to my children.
Right.
I do, however, teach them about traits to look out for, the kind of treatment they deserve from family members. What does manipulation tactics look like? These are the things that I teach my kids. This way, whether it's a group of people, whether it's a religion, whether it's anything, they'll be able to pick up on mind control and subtleties with the person without being able to know who I'm talking about. So can you speak to that on parenting? And if you have any opinions moving forward on, I know your kids are little, but if they start asking about grandparents, what is something that you find to be useful?
So one of the reasons, if someone's having a difficult time understanding, how can you possibly keep your own parent from being a grandparent? My answer is pretty self-explanatory. I didn't like who I was around my abuser. I'm not a good person. I'm the worst version of myself. And I'm not going to make my children pay for that.
Yes.
You know,
girl.
You know, because to think that a grandparent won't abuse a grandchild, they already abused a child when I was a child. So why wouldn't they do that again to another child? And abuse doesn't always look the same. So while they might not do the same tactics to me, they might be trying to manipulate my children against me.
Right.
And I'm not okay with that, obviously. So I just knew that I didn't want them to be exposed to the abuse, but more so, I didn't want them to see me be that person. And I didn't want a parent based on that kind of fear of not being the best version of myself that I could be for them. And I also knew that I couldn't heal with my abuser nearby like that.
It is so profound that you said that. And it touched my heart, because when I look at the abuse that I've been through, I've looked back on the kind of person I was. And sure, I have in retaliation said some pretty terrible things, and it wasn't the best version of myself. So it looks a lot like, who am I? And the minute you leave their energy, the minute you leave their environment, you feel whole again.
Yes.
And it's a very confusing place to be.
Right. So yeah, I mean, similar to you, my children are young, but I plan to do the same thing that you have done with your children. And I want to teach them not just to be wary of my own parents because of the toxicity there, but in general, I don't want them to fall into the same habits of finding toxic relationships, friendships or otherwise. And so I plan on, teaching them at age appropriate, language and, understanding of terms, what manipulation looks like, gaslighting looks like, abuse looks like, because abuse, I think in societal terms is still so focused on the physical and maybe verbal in the sense of outright overt name calling. Right. And outside of that, there's not a whole lot of grasping and understanding of what emotional abuse and mental abuse looks like, psychological abuse. So I want to make sure they have a firm grasp of that, so that if one day they do go, hey, I want to meet my grandparents, I can confidently go, okay. Confidently, while I'm like, oh God, on the inside, but, just know that they will feel empowered to stand up for themselves and say, I'm not okay with you treating me this way, or don't talk about so-and-so this way. That's not nice.
Yes, because the narcissistic parent, in my experience, for me, it generated I was a people pleaser like I've never seen before. I was basically a doormat. And the other thing it fostered was to me, it was, and this also has to do with high control religion, because they tell you God is a God of discipline. So you have a high control religion, you have a narcissistic mother, you think love is discipline, love is pain. You make those relationships. Right. So then you go to all these different relationships in your life, whether it's romantic or friendship, and you think to yourself, well, if they're mean, they must love me. It's because I deserve it. So then breadcrumbing comes along, where I started thinking, oh, well, they told me to get well soon if I'm sick. So they must really be no, that's human decency.
Yes.
That's not going above and beyond and being a life partner. So the
Yes.
littlest things to me was, oh, they must love me. Oh,
Yes.
somebody loved me.
I had the exact same experience, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, it's no wonder I fell into toxic relationships, because the toxic person would immediately be able to say the most minimal amounts of niceness. And I'd be like, oh, you love me.
Yes. Like it's like the bare minimum for me. And I felt like I was the one going above and beyond,
right.
because I'm the people pleaser.
I'm not sure about you, but for me, because of this cycle, I also developed a lot of like codependency behaviors.
Oh yeah.
So it's like I instinctually want to just care for everybody else around me. Mm-hmm. I will take on their burdens for them, and it's not my burden to bear. Mm-hmm. So yeah, between the people pleasing and the codependent behavior, it's
and then there's
interesting.
Being an empath that's how we are.
Yes.
This is why now I feel comfortable coming out publicly. It's because I've gotten so much help and done so much personal growth in how to be the empath who knows her boundaries. I can't be around emotional vampires. I can't be around people who suck me dry of my empath is a gift. It's not a matter of having empathy. It's who we are.
Right.
And I know who I can and can't spend time with.
Exactly.
And if I'm feeling particularly vulnerable, I'll just have to take that into consideration, especially for empaths. Self-care, which encompasses a lot of things. It's not just getting massages and taking a bath. Self-care is the number one thing we were taught was not okay.
Yep.
Growing up, it's like, wait, what? I can't just lay down. I have to go to school. I have to do my homework. I have to go to meetings. I have to. It was just always ongoing and never enough.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and then on top of it, we are not allowed to truly have an authentic self or an identity. We might develop some, but we have to conceal so much of ourselves that we end up kind of losing touch with who we really are, because we're so concerned about making not only the abuser happy, but preventing punishment from coming. And so, yeah, it's difficult to sort of find yourself after all that.
Yeah, because you're always looking for when's the other shoe going to drop? This person's being nice to me. How am I don't know if I can afford this. It's always, I don't know if I can emotionally afford it. It could be a very genuine person. Like my husband's a very genuine person. And even I, sometimes the trigger will be him being nice. And I'm like, okay, he brings me my coffee every morning, for example.
Right.
And there are some times where he'll bring me the coffee. And in addition to gratitude, I struggle with, okay, what am I doing for him? And how am I going to
like keeping a tally?
I'd rather him not bring the coffee sometimes.
Yes.
That just makes more sense to me.
Right. No, I totally understand. My husband functions very similarly. I struggle with some of the same things, but his mom taught him to keep tally of everything. Right. So that's something he's had to work on over the years, where it's not, well, I did this for you, so why aren't you doing this for me? And I'm like, excuse me, don't do something for me unless you want, you're just doing it out of the kindness of your heart. Don't expect something back. So he's learned that, which has been awesome, because then for me, I always have wondered, based on my previous abuse, are you doing this because you're genuine or not? So then imagine how difficult that was for us to work through, because he really was operating that way. And even when he was changing, I was still operating off of the assumption that you're probably doing this because you expect something back.
Yes. Well, I think that also goes back to the love bombing.
Yes.
When you're love bombed, in our experience, we know of people who would shower us with gifts instead of an apology. So something bad would be said, or behaviors would be really toxic within our home. And next thing you know, a vacation or, all of a sudden these amazing things pop up that I don't remember needing, but thank you. And then it's just really confusing. Part of me says,
accept this?
Right. Part of me says be grateful. And the other part of me says, well, what?
Well, and then there comes in the other part of the gaslighting, because what ends up happening is, if you don't accept this grand gesture, you're led to believe that you are ungrateful or unkind or unappreciative.
Yes.
So, I mean, and so, and then because that's been done so much, it's literally an internalized belief. So, as they're giving you something that's super grand, oh no, am I being ungrateful by not wanting to accept this? Why would you want to accept something from somebody that's being awful to you? but you've been taught to think you're ungrateful if you don't.
And then if someone who's genuine offers you a gift, it's like,
yes.
Wait, what did you do? What is this an apology for? It's
yes.
what a horrible way.
Yes, it's so true. Yes, but I find myself occasionally still being guarded when people go to gift me something.
Yes,
definitely. I don't know about you with gifts. I don't want to get on too much of a tangent, but when it comes to gifts, I have a difficult time giving them because I'm afraid someone will think there is an ultimatum. So instead, I make people feel like they aren't cared for because I just don't give them a gift at all.
I'm more of, I have a more difficult time with receiving than I do giving.
Sure.
Big time.
Sure.
And now I just like every time, for example, when he puts that coffee at my end table every morning, I think I'm so grateful because that cup of coffee may not show up tomorrow.
Right.
And that's kind of how I work with gifts now. And if people do want to offer a gift as an apology,
right.
I haven't had that experience in a while because I don't really have those people in my life anymore.
Can I ask a question of you?
Yes, of course.
So, because we're on the topic, thank you. Since we're on the topic of gifts. So for me, I had just mentioned I have a difficult time with giving gifts. And the reason for me, I'm wondering, I guess, if you've had this experience. My mom gave gifts in order to shame me or hurt me. And so I have a hard time giving gifts because I'm afraid of how the person will interpret the gift. Do they think it's a bad gift? Do they not think I was thoughtful enough? Do they not think that I care about them? So in my experience, my mom would buy me clothes that didn't properly fit me because she always had a comment about my weight. She would buy me things that she would know that I didn't like, intentionally to just sort of let me know, hey, this wasn't really intended for you. You were an afterthought. And a lot of times it would be like, oh, well, if you won't have it, then I'll just take it. I'm like, well, then what's the point of giving me a gift? So anyways, I digress. Did you ever experience that with gifts?
Gifts in my house were far and few in between. And it's a combination of things. We were on the poverty line growing up. So new clothes were out of the question. I was giving hand-me-downs from my older sister, and then I got taller than her. I do distinctly remember my toes were popping out of my sneakers. Yes. And we walked around Disney for hours with my toes popping out of my sneakers. And there was a refusal to buy me new sneakers. And then I would resort to stealing my friends' socks because I didn't have socks. So I would, oh, can I borrow a pair of socks? Or can I borrow this really cute shirt? And then I felt like I needed to do those things because I wanted to have socks or I wanted a clean shirt. So yes, it wasn't a matter of gifts. It was the
like neglect of your basic needs.
Neglect of basic needs. Yes. So now you should see my daughter's sock drawer. So it's like
she will never want for socks.
She will never want for socks. And I think that has a lot to do with being on the poverty line. But also the unwillingness to better herself, keeping us on the poverty line. So it is this huge layer. For me, when I give
that was similar to me as well.
I'm kind of different with giving gifts to someone. In fact, I make it an aim to look for things to celebrate for others. And I do that because I never experienced birthdays. I never really experienced anything really to celebrate the wins in my life. So I look for the wins. That way they know why it's happening. They know why they're being recognized. So
is that part of the Jehovah's Witness as well? You're right. Yes. You're not supposed to celebrate birthdays.
Yes. No birthdays, no holidays, but I could see why you feel that way.
I tend to be a chronic overtalker. I think because I'm afraid that I will be misunderstood. So I feel like I have to explain things excessively to be understood properly.
I can relate to that. I am an over-explainer, big time. I also tend to be an over listener because I want people to be heard.
Yes. Yes. I do that with my lives a lot where I have a difficult time stopping my life because I don't want anyone to feel like they're not being heard or seen or validated. So I'll go over by like 45 minutes because I'm just trying to.
Whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to this on the podcast, please go follow. Can you say what your handle is again? I don't want to get it incorrect.
Yeah. abuse_is_abuse.
If you go in the search bar on TikTok, just type abuse is abuse, all one word. She will pop right up. Her stuff is everywhere. You have you're rounding 65,000? Over 65,000
I just got to 66 this morning, which is just insane to me, but it's been amazing.
She goes live every day. Don't know how she does it, but It's it's honestly, Brianna, it's love for people that you do this. So we're really thankful for your expertise and for how much help you are giving the public and sharing your story. There really is a lot of value in that.
Thank you. I do. I just want to help people. I'm sure you get it. I never want anyone to feel as lonely or isolated as I did. And it took me so long.
It's a whole thing. It's hard to do because on one hand, you want to help other people, but on the other hand, there's that empathic side of you that doesn't want to speak badly about another person.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is really hard. Just this morning, I was watching videos about BPD and NPD and stuff, and just the heartstrings, were being pulled, where I'm like, I feel bad because I do know my mom is a hurt person.
Right.
And I abandoned her, and I'm sure that has even wounded her further. But she was so toxic, I couldn't do it anymore.
I think that's also where people who are no contact get looked at in a negative light. Well, she's your mother, or he's your father.
Yes.
How could you abandon them in their older age?
Right.
And when it's said like that, it does hurt. But there comes a point in time when abuse is abuse, just like your handle says.
Yeah.
And I'm fully ready to welcome people back into my life who have done the work and already
exactly
do better.
Yes. No, exactly. My no contact is not like a permanent thing, but it's permanent so long as the other person's not going to work to heal and be a better version of themselves. And I knew that at that time, my mom wasn't doing that.
Someone said to me yesterday, I'll never forget it. The phrase, blood is thicker than water.
Yes.
Now, the history of that is the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. And right? So what that means is, even though we are born into these families, we have a sense of loyalty and obligation, and people say family first.
Yeah.
That's not always a requirement.
No.
That's a construct. So there are people in my life who I've chosen to be in my life. They're my dearest friends because it's an interchange of encouragement. It's an interchange of building each other up. Just because someone is a family member does not mean that they need to be in your life. And it also doesn't mean you love them any less just because you are avoiding them. You can love someone and not have them in your life at the exact same time.
Yes, exactly. 100%.
What is something you wish you can say to your younger self if she were watching this video right now?
That's a good question. You're worthy. There is life that doesn't involve pain. And there is happiness, but you have to choose it. I think those are the big ones.
Brianna, it is such an honor to have you on this show. And to our viewers out there who may be dealing with this right now at home, there are strong, powerful women out there who are rising above this. We are here to help you. And Brianna is one of them. And I find it very refreshing. Like, you are such a shining example of someone who can rise above narcissistic abuse. And please go follow Brianna on her various outlets. And we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for having me, Wendy.